Hi, I'm Nabila. Welcome back to my channel. I've been sewing for about 15 years and invisible zippers are my favorite zippers to sew. That might sound odd considering they're one of the zippers that sewers struggle with, but I promise you, once you get the hang of them, they're incredibly satisfying to complete. Today I'm going to walk you through how to install an invisible zipper, and towards the end of the video, I'll show you how to attach everything to the lining and add the hook and eye to have a flawless invisible zipper. First, let's go over our most important tool, the invisible zipper foot. The one I'm always talking about on this channel is the clear invisible zipper foot. The reason I've fallen in love with this is because it has these notches to hold the zipper teeth open while you're sewing. This is a huge level up compared to your regular zipper foot, which simply helps you maneuver your needle closer to the zipper teeth. The problem I've always had with this foot is that I would jump the zipper teeth, which led to multiple rounds of seam ripping. The clear zipper foot doesn't allow for this to happen because it has a small opening that keeps your needle in the middle and holds the teeth out of the way at the same time. If you're not installing invisible zippers often, or you just don't want to buy this right now, you can still use the techniques that I'm showing in today's video with the regular zipper foot. Just go slowly as to not jump the teeth. However, I highly recommend switching to this foot if you can. It'll make installing the invisible zipper so much more enjoyable. I'll try to leave some links down below for this type of foot, but just be sure to check that your machine is compatible with the foot. The key to good sewing is good pressing. So before you get started, it's always a good idea to press your zipper teeth open. So if you haven't noticed on an invisible zipper, the zipper teeth kind of can hinge open like this, and I'm just gonna press this with low heat. As the zipper is cooling, I will carefully roll my fingers along the teeth to make sure that it stays open as it cools. Just be careful not to burn yourself while you're doing this. Next, I'm going to press back my seam allowance, and that just helps me visualize where exactly my seam allowance is. I've also seen some people do a basting stitch to visualize their seam allowance. I don't always do this, but it is helpful when you're trying to sew the most perfect invisible zipper. You can also add a strip of interfacing where you're about to apply the zipper for just some structure and reinforcing the fabric around your zipper. I'm not going to be doing that in today's example, but I highly recommend doing it if you're working with a heavy garment, such as a dress with multiple layers or an embellished skirt. Next, I'm going to make some helpful markings on my fabric and my zipper. First, I'll mark the top where the zipper starts and align that with each side of fabric. This will help make sure that I start at the correct place on each side. I'll do the same for the bottom or the end of my zipper. A good rule of thumb is to always give yourself at least 1 inch of extra zipper. That just makes it easier to maneuver around the zipper slider. Now that those markings are done, I'll pin my zipper starting with the right side and make sure I'm lining my zip up with the markings. I'm sewing the right side of my invisible zipper to the right side of the fabric, so I always double check that my right sides are facing each other. For this example, I've marked the wrong side with a colored pencil. Since that looks good, it's time to sew. And since I'm using my clear zipper foot, all I need to do is line the notch up with the zipper teeth and sew this at the correct seam allowance. I'm aiming for this line right here, and also my stitch length is at 3.5 on this machine, which is my typical stitch length. I've noticed that if my stitches are too tight, my zipper will have issues zipping up. I think this has to do with tension, and maybe this doesn't allow the zipper to have enough flexibility to zip up, but I'm actually not sure. So if you know why this happens, then leave that in the comments down below. Then I'll repeat everything for the other side. After I've pinned the other side, I also just like to double check that everything is on the correct side and nothing is twisted up before sewing. And there we go, look at that beautiful invisible zipper. Or I guess you can't see it because it's invisible. Now we'll finish up the rest of the seam. Because the zipper creates bulk, it might be tempting to start from the hem where there isn't any bulk and go upwards towards your zipper and end your stitch there. But I would try not to make that a habit, as it could lead to puckering where the zipper begins. Because what's the point of all this work to make the zipper invisible when the rest of your seam gives it away? You want to start your seam exactly where your stitch line for the zipper ended. So here's where I actually switched to my regular zipper foot because that's going to help me maneuver around this bulk and sew this seam straight down at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you're sewing an invisible zipper on a dress where you have a seam between the bodice and the skirt, it adds an extra sense of accomplishment when you can get these seams to line up. So one extra tip I have for you in this case is to sew a basting stitch on each side first to make sure that seam is lining up, and then you can sew a second stitch with your regular stitch length to lock that positioning in. Now that we have that seam done, what are our next steps? Well, to finish the zipper completely, I like to make a tack here at the end to reinforce the stopper. You can do this by hand or your machine, just be careful not to break a needle. You can also stitch the zipper tape down at the end on either side to make sure this isn't moving around. When I'm stitching the zipper tape down, I'm making sure to just catch the seam allowance below it and not the self fabric so it won't be visible on the outside of the garment. Then you can add a facing or a lining or both. I think it's a good idea to at least use a facing to elevate the inside finishings of your garment, but today I'm going to walk you through using an entire lining. Before I attach the lining to the zipper, I always sew all the lining or facing pieces together first. Then I'll have the right side of the lining and the right side of the self fabric facing each other so they sandwich the zipper. Hey, this is Editing Nabila here. I wasn't happy with the footage I got on how I layered my fabric to prepare to sew the lining, but I didn't want to seam rip my sample to reshoot this, so I made a new sample to help clarify what I'm talking about here. On my new sample, I marked the right side with the letter R and the wrong side with W. You can see the layer in front of me is facing right sides up, and the right side of the zipper is also facing up. Now to sew the lining, I'm making sure that my zipper is unzipped so I can lay it flat and place the lining so both right sides are facing each other. The zipper will be sandwiched between these two layers of fabric. For the second seam that I'll be talking about in this section, I'll be staying in this exact same configuration with the right sides facing each other, but I'll be sewing on this side, catching the tape again between these two layers of fabric. Okay, I hope that clarified things. Back to the video. So I'll start by sewing my lining at the top here, and I'm using my regular sewing foot. Next, I'm going to switch to my regular zipper foot, but any narrow foot will do. I'll make some markings on where I should stop my seam and sandwich my zipper between the self and the lining fabric. By the way, you should check what your pattern says because some patterns will recommend you make a vent at the back, but today I'm going to sew at 3/8 inch, so it's catching the zipper tape, but it's not too close to the zipper teeth. I want to allow for some space here so that the fabric doesn't get caught in the teeth and prevent the zipper from working. And then I'll clip this corner here at the top for when I flip this inside out. And to finish off this lining, I'm going to sew this seam the rest of the way down the same way I did on the self fabric. I forgot to do this on my sample, but it's a good idea to understitch your lining at this stage. To understitch, you will press your seam allowance towards the lining and then just sew through the lining and seam allowance only to keep the lining or facing from rolling to the outside of the garment. Lastly, you'll finish this by hand sewing a hook and eye. Typically, the hooks are on the right hand side and the eye is on the left side. You'll want to place the hook and eye at least 1/8 away from the edge of the fabric so they're not visible. I also like to anchor the hook and eye across the hardware so that they're not flapping around. You might be tempted to skip a hook and eye if you're in a rush, but they are pretty important. Zippers aren't particularly good at bringing the fabric together, so they need some help with that so that they can close properly and easily. Okay, I feel like I covered a lot in this video and I'm actually losing my natural light, but I hope this helps you feel confident when you're sewing an invisible zipper. If you have any questions, leave them down below and I'd be happy to make a follow-up video. But for now, thanks for watching and I hope you have a great day. Bye!